job on the listservs of keeping us all up to date on what's been happening. So we will do a very brief look at that. Where we're going to focus our time is on two other pieces. The first is on the Community Schools Initiative, which has come forward through all of these legislative discussions as being a really important piece of what some of the funding formulas may be tied to. So we wanted to just share what we learned about community schools, what we learned about how those can be positively impactful to us as the Woodstock community. And then also wanted to just talk a little bit about what resources we see existing in the community that may help to get us there if we decide to go in that direction. And then the second thing that we wanted to focus on was, we've been talking a lot as a community about school facilities, about how to think about those. We know that throughout Vermont, we're having PCB testing done. And so we wanted to look at what different models were for school facilities across different locations, across different formats of schools, just to give us some ideas of what some different possibilities might be. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ben and Meredith.
Thanks, Professor. Folks hear me okay and see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just wanted to highlight two of our other classmates, Selin and Amal, who unfortunately weren't able to make it today, but part of this research is theirs too. Grateful for the time today. As Professor said, we'll just kind of quickly run through the legislative updates, and Superintendent Souza has done a great job of keeping the community abreast. But as most of you may know, the Senate Appropriations Committee just finished giving a positive recommendation for H454 after significant amendments by the Senate. So now is the time to be calling representatives. Please refer to Superintendent Souza's note on kind of why this bill is bad for Woodstock and represents potentially $6 million of cuts in funding for the students in MVSU across the community. So I'll just go quickly through the big thing here is the foundation funding formula, which drops down to $14,000 and 541 students. That's this third to last row here. And if we kind of take that with today's population of students, that's where we get that $6 million gap versus today's revenues that are collected through property taxes. This is a pretty comprehensive bill that has a whole host of issues that we've listed here. I think the one thing that we are excited about, which is definitely top of mind, is the reinstatement of the school construction aid, which would give the Agency of Education leeway to do 20 to 40% aid on the annual debt service for any school construction project. And there's also an additional funding for this emergency aid fund, which would provide funding for projects up to $300,000 in the case of PCB failures that we anticipate potentially having this summer. So there are some good things in here, but all in all, I think we share the opinion that there's a lot of challenge with the current bill, and so wanted to just give that quick highlight. With that, Meredith is going to talk us through community schools.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Hey, y'all. So can I just over Zoom, quick show of hands if you've heard of community schools before? Some people, yes. Okay, wonderful, great. Some people not. That's also great. So we'll give you a quick primer of what community schools look like in Vermont and then what we think they could look like in Woodstock. So at a high level, community schools are a model that you can create within a public school that is meant to transform the school from not just a place we send our kids for certain hours a day and cross our fingers, hope everything goes okay, but actually fully embedded in the community and fully resourced with all of the existing assets and partnerships and everything that teachers and staffs really truly need to be able to address all of the holistic needs of students and their families. It's not meant to be just an unfunded mandate or more work given to teachers, but really repositioning schools as being like the coordinating anchor within a community so that it's a one-stop shop for students, families, and all the stakeholders. In Vermont, there's been, in recent years, since 2021, a growing movement of community schools. The University of Vermont has been a major player in this space. They run the Catamount Community Schools Collaborative, and we're using a lot of their research here. Over the last couple of years, the first wave of community schools in Vermont, they've done a major evaluation and found really promising early results, reductions in chronic absenteeism, rising teacher satisfaction, increasing MAP scores, higher student and community member participation. And so for Woodstock, we think this could be a really exciting approach. The researchers at UVM talk a lot about the community school mindset, and that there's like this intangible benefit of like creating the sense of community ownership and like collective desire to participate in making our schools as great as possible and fully resourcing them with all that they need. And we think that could go a really long way, especially given all of the conversations about school infrastructure. We also think this could really strengthen Woodstock's position as a hub school. And could offer potentially more funding pathways. Historically, community schools have been funded through federal and state funding, but there also is some potential to bring in outside philanthropy to support some of this work. So that is the overview. Then if you want to move us on. There are 5 like classic community school pillars. I'll quickly go through. The first is integrated student support. So those are those wraparound services, health, mental health, housing, food access, all of the things that are not strictly teaching and learning, but we know that deeply impact kids in classrooms. Then there's collaborative leadership structures, making sure parents, community members have a voice in school leadership, really intentional community engagement strategies, expanded learning opportunities. So thinking about before, after school, summers, weekends. And then the 5th one is a Vermont specific pillar, which I think is really wonderful, is strong focus on safe, inclusive, and equitable learning environments. A lot of these are probably things that I know Woodstock Union already cares deeply about and is doing. And the strategy really is about formalizing them and then making sure there's the resources to fully live all of those out. So I want to walk through 4 quick case studies of what community schools look like in rural communities. The first is Hazen Union School in Hardwick. It is part of this Catamount Community Schools Collaborative that's supported by the University of Vermont. With their additional community school funding, they brought in an additional MTSS coordinator to really focus on personalized, like one-to-one academic intervention with their students. They created a food pantry, dental clinic on site. I really love their school is near a trail that attracts a lot of tourists to come bike. And so they partnered with their city rec department to create this like bike maintenance elective where students are purchasing old bikes, learning how to refurbish them, reselling them, like really participating in that local tourism economy. I also want to highlight Windsor Central School District. This is a non-Vermont example, but to showcase that this work is happening in other rural areas. Binghamton University in Vermont, or in New York, is supporting a lot of community schools in upstate New York. They really focused on a health-based approach. They created 3 school-based clinics throughout their district. And they also created, which I think is really relevant for a high school, this drop-in center student lounge. It's this really compelling place where their teenagers can come and hang out outside of school hours and have that safe place to build community with each other. Then last 2 case studies to highlight. North County Supervisory Union is actually an entire supervisory union that decided to embrace the community school approach. They hired a lot of restorative truancy and staff members who build these really personal relationships with students, families. They do home visits, and this is part of a strategy to reduce chronic absenteeism. They also have this Van Gogh Mobile Arts Lab, which not only teaches electives in schools, but like goes into the community and hosts these community arts nights to really show that what's happening in the school isn't just isolated to the school. And finally, they have this really robust family resource center where families can get one-to-one support to connect them to the resources they need for whatever issues they're experiencing. And then finally, White River Valley Middle School, last case study I'll highlight. I think really creative what they did is they found that their students' transportation was a main barrier to students being able to take advantage of their after school and summer resources. And so they worked with the Tri-Valley Transit to actually create new bus stops and new bus routes that helped get their kids to school and take advantage of all these activities. They also have a very cool outdoor STEAM classroom where they like have an orchard at the school. A bunch of different courses use it for hands-on learning, and students are growing produce there and stocking a local food pantry. So you can really see that like circular relationship between the school and the community. So these are just examples. Community schools look different because they are meant to really like be tailored to your specific community. But the initial first steps in implementing a community school are really about first hiring a director to come in and spearhead the work. And those early steps that director would take would be conducting community asset mapping, understanding what already exists in this community, and then how could we really make the school a more porous place where those assets can come in and out of our school. determine what the funding, what funds are needed, and then pursue the funding strategy, and then working really collaboratively with community members to define what do we want for our kids and what is our ideal vision of our school. Our real excitement here is startup costs are not incredibly high. Looking at the schools that have transitioned to this model in Vermont so far, they've spent between 160 and 230,000 per school per year, often with like a 3-year initial grant to phase in the implementation. So we do think this is a feasible to fund this not only with state dollars, but with outside philanthropy as well. And then last things, I know Ben and I are Woodstock outsiders, but we took, based on our conversations with folks, here's our initial thinking on what incredible assets already exist in Woodstock that could be a basis for this community schools. There are just a wealth of youth programs, recreation, culture, history, art spaces, all of these nature trails, and ideally a community school would really build on all of these existing assets. And so in our last, this is again, some initial thinking on priorities we've heard around Woodstock and what this might look like in a community school setting. So for instance, we've heard interest in hands-on learning and apprenticeships for high schoolers and local businesses, especially in healthcare, childcare, hospitality, and we see direct connections to the existing craft pathway at Union, at Woodstock Union, and the other existing Center for Community Connections work, and really expanding and resourcing that so that could grow further. We think youth having safe and engaging after school time is a key priority, and this is where we think all of the wonderful nature resources could really play a role. We know social emotional learning, bringing in more of that one-to-one support staff to really support student mental health, and having the funds to do that is key. We also know that core literacy and math instruction could be a focus. In this place, we've seen community schools who, again, bring in more of those one-to-one tutoring supports. We've seen really exciting community school models where they've brought in their retiree local population to serve as reading buddies, or kind of into these lower lift tutoring roles, and give teachers an extra hand. And then we also know there's things like the Veggie Van Go mobile van that again could bring in and make these spaces where schools could be sources of food and nourishment for everyone. So those are our initial visioning. We will pause here, I think, Ben, to see if any questions on community schools. Yes, okay. Pause for questions.
If you're on Zoom, we are going to need you to raise your Zoom hand because we're only seeing a side view.
That was a question. The startup costs, does that mainly, so there's the director, obviously is probably the biggest portion of that, and what other costs are involved?
It really depends. Yeah, it depends entirely on the community vision of what you want to do. You're right, the director is a major one. If you want to hire additional like MTSS support staff, those salaries would be an additional. And then it could just be, if you're having a school-based clinic on site, there might be some like physical infrastructure of setting up that clinic space or some initial supplies, but it varies.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody in the room have a question? All welcome. Anyone on Zoom would like to ask a question or make a comment? Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Right, I'm unmuted.
Yes. No, you're muted now.
Unmute. There we go. Showing my Zoom expertise here. I just had actually a question of both students and of Professor Hyde, and that is, as I relayed to you earlier today, when we chatted, Curry, I'd love to get this evening an email of this slide presentation, just so that I can refer to it when I write the article tomorrow about the group's report. So I don't know who could best.
This is Sherry. I can forward it to you.
Excellent. If you could shoot me that tonight, sure, I'd really appreciate it. And then I'll have plenty of material to work with for the article tomorrow.
Thank you, Tom. I will.
Excellent. Good.
And Meredith, just related to that, could you share a bit about, I know you and the team did a lot of research with folks at UVM. Could you just share a little bit about where the community schools work is hubbed out of, kind of how you guys came to that as a potential model?
Yes, for sure. Yes, thanks, Ben. The Catamount Community Schools Collaborative is like a university research practice partnership based out of some researchers at UVM. Peter Knox, in particular, we can share his contact information, is very enthusiastic supporter of the community school model. He's a PhD in education over at UVM. And so they have been doing some of the like technical assistance to schools, like helping them understand what the community school model is, helping schools work through a community visioning process of what this could look like, and then pursue grant funding from the state and federal government to be able to execute those models. And then as they execute them, those researchers from UVM work hand in hand to do the evaluation support. So then you have the evidence to say, here's what we got from this initial investment, and then, seek further investment and resources. And they're very eager to expand their work. I think it's a pretty uncertain landscape, again, for federal funding for community schools. But despite that, I think they're eager to be creative and think about how else could we get the funds to continue this model.
It's just
Thank you, Lara. Oh, who was it? Ben, right?
Yeah, just one quick thing to add, just from the latest draft of the House Bill H454, it doesn't actually mention community schools anymore. And so, kind of for good or for bad, I think this will have to come from us in partnership with UVM if it is something that Woodstock and MVSU is interested in.
Go ahead, Lara.
Yeah, thank you for this. This was beautiful. This sounds really cool, and I look forward to having discussions about it with the board. So I really appreciate these new and innovative ideas.
Yeah.
I did have one additional question of the researchers, and that is, given what appears to be, whether you look at the House version or the Senate version of the Education Transformation Act, it's quite evident that there's going to be some significant consolidation of school districts into a much smaller number around the state. And I'm just wondering if the UVM team, the community schools team, has looked at sort of larger geographic areas as community schools. I mean, you mentioned the entire district up in the Northeast Kingdom. That is an example of that pretty broad geographic area. I wonder if you can just reflect on that a little more.
Yeah, it's a model that can happen within a school, within a district. I think there's not a direct tie here to this question of consolidation, but I think where we see the indirect connection is that this model helps to show that like what happens in our schools isn't isolated to just our schools, but that our schools are truly an anchor of our community. And that, like, for example, the Hazen Union School is their town designated emergency shelter, right? And so, or if that's where you're going to the dental clinic, right, then it changes the relationship of residents to their school, and really is thinking about investing in schools as the key asset of a community where not just, teaching and learning happens, but all of the other supporting actions. And so this is where we're starting to think about really embracing this model can help to show the importance of why we need this school building in this place. And it's beyond just the learning that happens there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Corinne?
Have you, in any of the examples that you looked at in Vermont, have you seen particular benefits in terms of the provision of like mental health specifically services to students utilizing schools or community schools as sort of like a regional hub where, in Vermont generally, that's it's a tough landscape for finding providers.
Yeah, I think creating those like clinics in schools that are physical and mental health and taking existing providers and making sure they are accessible in schools is definitely a strategy other schools have used. I think, again, would have to look specific to the specific community. I think in terms of the evaluation of the like effectiveness, the researchers found like a really notable decrease in chronic absenteeism, which I think we can take as a little bit of a proxy for student like social emotional well-being, that if a student is choosing to come to school so much more often, then they're choosing to come to that space and feeling more seen and recognized in that space.
Laura, did you have another question?
Nope.
Sorry, no.
That's all right.
I know Ben has more to share also on infrastructure, so we're happy to loop back for some additional questions after that.
Okay, well, I think we thank you very much.
I think there's still more.
Oh, there's more questions?
No, I think Ben had additional presentation.
Oh,
Yes,
good. Go ahead.
there's a short snippet just on what we were calling zero build solutions or community embedded infrastructure. And so what that means is are there opportunities for the education of middle and high school students at Woodstock Union to take place outside of the physical building, given facilities conditions that we are facing today? And so largely we see this across the country. There's not a ton of examples, but we're able to find a couple around public school districts who are using, retail fronts or warehousing or et cetera to house school buildings. This actually happens a lot more in urban environments and public charter schools specifically, but ways to get creative around, what really is a classroom, what really is a school building, especially when you're in a pinch and you need somewhere to teach kids, right? And so there's big synergies that we can think about with around what Meredith just shares around community schools, and that if we get our students to be embedded within the community and we get the community invested in these students, right, it would also increase the relationship and likelihood of bond passage for the future facilities project as well. I think for the town, there's also the benefit of kind of revitalizing spaces and getting away of empty storefronts and just more hustle and bustle in the community that makes everyone feel better as well. And so we'll talk through 3 different case studies today. The first is actually across the state in Burlington. So I don't know who else caught the news, but in 2020, there was toxic chemicals that necessitated the shutdown of Burlington High School. And so as they were coming back from COVID, back to in-person learning, Burlington School District was able to identify a vacant Macy's, and they were able to retrofit the site. And so you see a school building with an escalator inside, right? But if you think about what you need from a facility standpoint, you need a lot of open space, right? And then you can put up little walls and partition classrooms, and largely, you can make it work. And so for $4 million in 10 weeks, the Burlington School District was able to complete the project and host students for in-person learning, all doing distance learning. And they are still renting the facility for $1 million a year right now and having school in a Macy's, right? And so it seems somewhat science fiction, but it's an example just a couple hours away across the state of schools that are willing to make this facilities solutions work. Another example we found in North Kansas City, so these are more early childhood centers, and so they were looking at consolidating their various early childhood centers, and they found, again, a large retail storefront, so former Price Chopper, Hobby Lobby, right, one of those massive warehouse type stores. This one was a bit more pricey and took a little bit longer, so 6 months of renovations and $24 million of capital investment. But they were able to create a really bespoke early childhood learning center. You can see in some of these pictures, right? A lot of the painting and the detailing and the furnishings have been really catered to make what used to be a retail storefront a very hospitable and welcoming and warm school environment. And they're still using the facility and were awarded Early Childhood Program of the Year despite their kind of unconventional facility. So again, just pushing the envelope on thinking, can school happen outside of a school building? What renovations do we need to make XYZ retail storefront, empty warehouse, a warm and hospitable school building? Last one is actually brainchild of our own Professor Hyde, who helped set up the Wildflower Schools in Cambridge and across the Northeast. And so these are Montessori small classroom preschool early childhood centers, and they're able to start up a classroom for students in 1,000 square feet of space, so kind of one single classroom, and for around $125,000 for each of these classrooms. And so these are next to coffee shops, right? The one here in Cambridge is, I think, 2 doors down from a coffee shop that I go to all the time. And so um, they were able to replicate this across 60 sites in 17 states and territories across DC and Puerto Rico. And so just another example of putting the school into the community. I think one of the benefits as we turn to thinking about um, how is this relevant for Woodstock Union? How is this relevant for MVSU? Is one, there is a lot of empty real estate that's not currently being used, right? And so if this is something, if we are worried about PCB testing coming back negative and having to shut down parts of the Woodstock Union building, then starting now to identify where are there friendly landlords and where are there sites that are close by, close to each other, have enough square footage, could lead to a faster turnaround time if we do need a solution other than putting portables in the parking lot, right? Which is kind of the baseline solution. Typically, when you're thinking about doing these zero build solutions, finding the real estate is often the hardest part. I think that tends to not be as much of a challenge in this Woodstock context. And so the next big step is understanding what zoning and renovation requirements, maybe having an architect come help you understand what plans look like. And then to Meredith's whole point on the community schools is getting out there in the community and making sure that you have the buy-in of neighbors, that that people are getting excited about this. I think people tend to be wary if you're going to have a bunch of middle or high schoolers running around town, right? And so how do you mitigate some of that and bring out the best of Woodstock and bring them together? One interesting thing, again, the bill is kind of still in the Senate and being read again this week, but if it does pass as it currently is, they will have a school construction aid program that has the emergency aid fund, which will be available on July of 2026. And that reimburses 30% of project costs up to $300,000 of a project, so $90,000 off a $300,000 project. They're still pretty opaque around kind of what the requirements will be and who approves that project. That's all happening under the Agency of Education. And one thing that is still not very clear, but I would think about is this is in conjunction with the larger 20 to 40% school construction aid program that's being stood up. And so whether or not MVSU would be penalized for double dipping in both the emergency fund and the new build project is something that I would continue to urge you all to think about as you have conversations with the Agency of Education. Right now, all they've said is that they're going to define a point prioritization methodology and bonus incentive structure that denotes whether schools get 20% of the aid or all the way up to 40% of the annual debt service for any facility project that does receive state aid. So pause there for questions and concerns around community embedded infrastructure.
Just one other example that we did not deep dive on, but for folks who are curious about what this community embedded infrastructure looks like, in Illinois, the Illinois Math and Science Academy is actually a public boarding school that took a former Army facility, a former Army-based facility, and repurposed it as a math and science high school that actually services students from all over Illinois and brings them to a central location. So just another really interesting way of thinking about taking existing assets, repurposing them at relatively low cost, and creating something particularly interesting for students.
I think it's an interesting idea. There's a lot of logistics around licensing spaces and square footage that comes into play. Plus the multi-age classrooms where, you could have several different grades accessing, for example, an art class or a math class. And that's the transportation piece. To figure that out would be a lot. So that one's hard to wrap around. But if you're desperate, you have to look at everything.
I know that we're at our time, so just any final questions for our students before we let them go? No? So Meredith, Ben, thank you for joining us. Also, I want to thank the entire community. These folks did a lot of interviewing, spent time with a lot of folks in our community, including Carrie and Superintendent Sousa. So thank you to everybody for all of your work in collaboration on this project, and we really hope that it will be useful for the community.
Thank you all. Great project.
Yes, thank you very much, and maybe we'll collaborate again. No end
Thank
of
you.
problems to be solved.
Thanks, all.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, is there any other public comments before we move into an executive session? We will put the handout that you saw quickly up on the website this week, and so you can look at it again, and of course, feel free to ask further questions. All right, is there a motion to go into executive session?
And to be clear, committees will go into
Their own Zooms.
their own Zoom. So if you're here for other committee meetings, those will occur immediately after this executive session.
Yes, and it's a different
Zoom link.
Zoom link. Thank
And,
you. Public comment?
I'm going to stop recording, Sherry, since you're going to executive session, and then it'll just download to my computer up to this point. But I'll stop now.
Thank
I'll
you.
make a motion to move into executive session.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase it.
Take a shot at it.
I'll move to approve the expansion of the dual enrollment offering,
Compensation for teachers.
compensation for teachers.
Okay, is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Elliot. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that will pass, and then we'll pass it on to the union and sign it off, and I think it's a nice opportunity for teachers, students, and for the school. All right, I think we are going to adjourn, so if somebody would like to make a motion to